learn how to 3D that thing. I call it 3D in it, meaning that you have to take those words. I visualize when I read. You have to take those words off the page. Reading a whole bunch of symbols on a page, on a white page, white background, ain't that all that entertainment? Take that words off that page and imagine it. Let it come into your imagination. You know what I'm saying? Let it come into the nation of images. Actually bring it off the page and actually let it actually play it out in your head. And I think it was College that said that you got to see yourself, your condition, and your way out of your condition. And everything you read, put yourself in the story. Don't just dry read all this information and be able to quote these statistical facts. Put yourself in the story and let yourself actually allow yourself to have an emotional moment in the things that you're reading. Because if you allow yourself and you allow that imagination to play its part, if you allow that to happen, if you allow that divine goddess part of the mind to take over while you're taking in that logical information, you'll see some magical things taking place in your understanding and your comprehension. So that's how you read. Don't pass up not one word that you don't understand. Don't just read the book and just flow through the words, and you know for a fact that you don't have a working definition of that word, but you keep going, you're going to lose the entire sentence. The dictionary can work like an oracle for you. If you don't know the meaning of the word, again, I got it out of the autobiography of Malcolm. Malcolm copied the entire dictionary down. I didn't do it like that, but every word that I did not have a working definition of, and I mean, when I say working definition, if somebody said, what does that mean? And it could be a word that you can use your entire life. If you cannot define that word, just say, man, everybody know what it means. It means you don't know what it means.
If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
The Panther 48.
The tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing to die for.
Tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those living, those yet unborn.
Peace and power. Once again, this is the Panther 48. This is your big brother Sight calling out of Dallas, Texas. I got my two other brothers in the Panther 48 sitting with me. I got Brother E calling out of Florida. Brother E is the former Minister of Information of the founder chapter of the New Black Panther Party, the Dallas chapter. Peace and power, Brother E.
Yes, sir. Zaza.
I got calling out of California, calling out of San Diego, California, the chairman of the San Diego chapter of the Black Panther Party, and the national chief of staff for the People's Black Panther Party, and a former chairman of the original chapter of the New Black Panther Party, founding chapter, Dallas chapter, Brother Robert War Williams. Peace, Brother War.
Power to those that know what power means.
True indeed. Today we're going to discuss. Today we had decided to come at this thing because we had been asked by a faithful follower and supporter of the channel to for a book list for new Panthers. So we say, well, they said new and old Panthers. I'm gonna read the statement in a minute, but we were starting out. We were going to give a book list, and we were going to go into a breakdown and a build of why these books was important. But then we thought deeper about that, and we thought about before we would give anything like that, we should probably get into the process of study. We should probably get into the process itself, because sometimes when you've been building for a long time, like, somebody. So we decided that it would be important to get into the process of study. So before we start, let me read this little short comment. But the brother said, I think the brother's name is Chris Sears, 9083. He said, Habari Gani, once again, excellent build. Any chance of a book list for young, mature, and elderly new Panthers in training? So the brother asked us for that. And I brought it to the brothers and said, gave them that statement and said, let's put together a book list for what he say, new, young, and elderly new Panthers in training. So what do you brothers think on that?
Oh, well,
Go ahead, E.
I read the question, but until you read it again, I'd forgotten the part where he said the young, the new, the older. That's that even broadens it up more. But for me, the thing that stuck out most was the idea. I got real confused because I couldn't determine from the phrase New Panther exactly what if it was supposed to, what was he meaning by New Panther? Does it mean technically somebody filled out paperwork, somebody that's getting into the movie? I mean, because I think the book lists are going to have to be tailored or contextual. It's going to be an ever-growing, ever-evolving part of the process for each person. I mean, there are books that I would definitely start to just kind of start feeling each other out, where the other person is, you know, how it is they learn, what their thinking process is, you know, all of that type of stuff. So it's all going to be real ambiguous to me, you know, and for me, it's always going to be a reference to culture. You know, I know folks come in to like the party and want to learn everything about the party, and that's cool. But the reality of it is the party knew everything about the party and it still didn't get it right. So looking back again at the biggest dichotomy that was going on was that cultural aspect and laying that groundwork, because we come to the party because we want to rebel, and that's all well and good. But to make that revolution is to make that change. To change that rebellion into a revolution is to make that change, and that's where culture comes in, to define what it is, not only what we're running from, but where it is we're running to. And so, you know, having that kind of as a backdrop, for me, that begins a dialogue between, you know, who's asking the question and who it is that's receiving that question, and developing it from there. So I don't know if that's of any value, but I'll pass the mic.
So I would say the first thing you got to think about is the process of becoming self-driven. Driven is a journey, and it requires self-awareness, goal setting, motivation, discipline, continuous learning, taking initiative, and self-reflection. So with that, what we typically do when you have someone that claims they want to be a Panther and start coming into the movement, the thing about that is there's a few questions that we first asked of someone. First one being, what is a Panther? And we ask that question because 9 times out of 10, we're going to get an answer that don't make no sense. And that kind of takes it right back to what Brother E talked about. And you have to ask that person, well, what was it that drove you to the point of wanting to serve the community? Was it to serve the community, or was it because you ended up finally feeling the butt end of oppression to the point to where you feel like enough is enough and now action needs to be taken because it finally, in your mind, landed on your doorstep? So you want to commit to something because of out of the hurt or pain that you're feeling directly, but have not recognized the connection between you as an individual and the collective people constantly being hurt, constantly being oppressed, constantly being destroyed. And so we have to draw them back into the recognition of the collective. And with that, I always start off with the 3 concepts or the 3 processes of the human being. I always say your appetite, your diet, and your digestion. Because if my appetite was not there to where I was the kind of person that was conscious of a worldview, conscious of suffering collectively, conscious of us being oppressed and why we are oppressed, then that means that my appetite is still not ready, even though I experienced pain and now all of a sudden I got my up and I want to be a part of something. But if my appetite is not prepared, it's not ready, then how do you put me in the right the right mindset to be able to take in what's required of me to even be a Panther? So before I even throw a book at you, if you don't have the right appetite to want to digest material, yet alone Panther material, but I may not even be in the right headspace to say, hey, I want to read a book, because I hadn't been that way. So if I hadn't read a book in the last 5 years, but now all of a sudden I want to be a Panther, what's going to make me be any different now that I want to be a Panther, when whatever else I wanted to be, whatever else was my appetite prior to now, to all of a sudden drive me to the right mindset of being able to be a studious person. So we have to address the appetite. With that, you have to now go into your diet, because based upon your appetite, what do we talk about? Again, physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of your appetite. Now we have to talk about your diet, because when we address your diet, we're talking about the things that you have taken in and what has made you become you before you even step through the doors and recognize that, hey, I think I want to be a part of something greater. Because if I put a book in front of your hands and you have been taking in things that have been poisoning you physically, mentally, and spiritually, then all of a sudden it's going to be a shock to you, and you ain't gonna like what it tastes like because you don't have the right appetite. And so all of a sudden you're going to be behind the curveball, because based upon the diet you've had, the digestion, which is what makes you, is not prepared and not in the right space to be able to take in the amount of study and amount of growth and amount of learning that you're going to need to be able to go into. So we have to move backwards first, and then work on how do you get this person with the right appetite, with the right diet, so therefore they digest the information that's being presented to them. Because if I throw that book at you and you don't have a right appetite, you're not going to read. And if you do read some of it, based upon your diet, if this is this one book that you may dig into every now and then, in reference to all of the other junk food that you eat, the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of the month, then the problem is it's not going to be enough healthy material that you're digesting to offset everything else that you have been taking in. And so therefore, you're not going to be able to keep up with just the basic process of what it means to be a Panther with a poor appetite and a poor diet. And so we have to get them to see and self-reflect and see themselves first in the condition and state that they're in.
I think that it was something else that was not in that particular comment, but some left later, because we dropped a couple of shorts with book lists and things for people to study, and we dropped some on our community message board, a quick I think 5-6 book reading list for beginners, and which makes me have to go back to the question that E asked about the new Panther thing, because when I put that book list together, when I was thinking new from the perspective of someone who's newly born. They just came into it, haven't really done any study. They just at the point where they say, okay, maybe it's like what War just said, that oppression finally hit their front doorstep, or they finally got to the point where they say, man, I've had enough. I'm ready to rebel. This looks like the place where I can do it at. But anyway, that comment was essentially in response to the books and to the people that we chose to utilize in those in our response to the brother asking for a book list. And some said, why isn't Elijah Muhammad's Supreme Wisdom on there? Why isn't Elijah Muhammad's message to the black man on there? They asked these questions, and it's something that I just wanted to say because we talked about it being cultural. But while these are great books, I own. What's up? What's up, E?
No, go ahead.
Oh, while these are great books, I own and have read them multiple times, studied the information. But I think that a lot of times what comes into the party now is people that haven't done enough studies on the black history and the black struggle throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. If you look at these times, they think that the Nation of Islam, the Black Panther Party, and all of these groups are just interchangeable, and they're not. If I was to use an illustration, a metaphor for the two, and these are poor, but they're the best that I can think of right now. The Nation of Islam would be more like what the Vatican would be for the black community. And the Panther Party, the whole subculture and I'm talking about the subcultures of the groups, the whole subculture of the Panther Party would be more like what a military is for a country, would be like what the Marines are, or something of that nature. You don't go into the military with the studies of the Nation of Islam, or with the studies of the Vatican. You don't go into the Vatican with the studies of the military. And I'm not limiting the Panther Party to just being militant, but we all know without a shadow of a doubt that there are a lot of people that are drawn to the Panther Party because of the militancy. We've seen those who have came into the Panther Party, and while we can't comprehend why they would think that they could join an organization on that level without studying, many of them don't want to study because they were drawn by the guns, by the militancy. You know what I'm saying? So it's a different culture. So the books that was on those book lists was books speaking to a revolutionary ideology, a revolutionary way of thinking, a revolutionary way of looking at things. Those was the basic determinants of the books that went on that book list. And we will go into greater detail with books. And I think the only books on that book list that wasn't necessarily political in nature, and everything's political, was The Broader File, a book like The Broader File. And that book is on that list for a reason. It goes into what E is always stressing. It goes into what I heard Dr. Umar say. It goes into what I heard Dr. Khalid say. Hell, hell, Martin Luther King said it in his last book that he wrote before he died, Chaos Community. Where do we go from here? All of them have been saying it. The foundation, and we've said it a million times on this channel, the foundation of any people's struggle will be their culture. It is the culture. No people can struggle or resist any kind of oppression if they don't see the need to unite with one another. And the need to unite is given to a people through culture. So that's why culture was one of the first things that was separated from the people, because if you separate people from their culture, you separate them from self, from each other. And once you separate people from each other, then them trying to come together while separated is almost insane. So that's why those books are on that reading list, and that's why we posted those books on our message board, because they are a good foundational start. But like he said, I wasn't thinking of it from a perspective, because a new Panther could have been a Panther studying for the last 15 years if he's a member of the new Black Panther Party, or if he's a member of even the original version of the new Black Panther Party. He was be considered a new Panther, but he may have been studying for the last 15, 20 years. So anyway, I wanted to just bring that up, and I'm gonna pass to you, E. I want to bring that up and tell the listening audience why we didn't use an Elijah Muhammad book as a beginning reference for somebody who's operating from a Panther culture. Go ahead, E.
Well, what I was going to say is what you just said speaks to what makes it such a revolutionary concept, is because if you go to work or somewhere with Europeans, they have a static starting point. We don't. In order to understand the new Black Panther Party, you got to understand the Black Panther Party, Huey and them. And to understand them, you got to understand Malcolm. To understand Malcolm, you got to understand Elijah and the Nation, the Moors. You got to understand Garvey. You can't understand it isolated by itself, because that's not what it was. That's not our nature. All of these things are interrelated, and that's completely counter to the whole mindset of the European, whose culture we currently practice.
And I can see what a person is thinking if they thinking about, because we can't deny that Elijah Muhammad and what he brought to the community is a foundational pillar. If we was to have to choose 8 foundational pillars, he would have to be one of them, because so many great speakers and voices for the struggle came out of what Elijah Muhammad taught. Just like you just said, if you got to understand Malcolm, you're going to understand Malcolm, then you got to understand Elijah and what the nation brought. But that's what I was speaking to, of why we didn't use an Elijah Muhammad or Message to the Black Man in that beginning list.
That's why I was going. First of all, it's 800 million books. I don't have that much time on a reel or a short or whatever to put every book that I've heard of or think would contribute and da 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 da. So really, it's more to engage a conversation just like this, because now this conversation is being had. It's no disrespect. It's not to say this book is better than that book. It's just an attempt to grab some ideas to begin to have a conversation, to curve the conversation in a particular direction. So everybody didn't make the list. There are those, because I think because there are like 2 of them, and I know I included like a Langston Hughes book or something in regards to that part of the culture, because that part of the culture is often overlooked. You can't, again, going back to that same idea, you can't understand Malcolm and Elijah if you don't understand the Harlem Renaissance, because the Harlem Renaissance was hip hop back then. That's what it was. And just like hip hop and rap music and all of that affects us like we affect it day in and day out, it's the same as true of the Harlem Renaissance. And so understanding that era and the culture or the cultural expression that we were involved in at that time is just as necessary as everything else. But yeah, I mean, it's thousands of books that we could have, should have made one day. It's always going to be books that get left out. But again, for me, it was more of an idea of engaging in a conversation, putting some names out there, some names that hadn't been heard of, or some names that might not have been heard of as much as others, or, you know, whatever. But to engage that conversation, and even just the question itself speaks to where the questioner speaks to where their mindset is. And that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing, because that's something to build a conversation off of. And for us, that static book list, one size fits all, I mean, it has its places. You know, it's got its spot, but the reality of it is everybody don't need the same thing at the same time all the time. It's all going to be different. It's going to be flowing. And we have to begin to learn in that way again, because that's the way we learn. You know, we're polyrhythmic people. We can do 3 or 4 things at once and do them all well. You know, having 2 or 3 degrees like they do in this country is, oh, that's 2 or 3. That's regular. That's basic for us back in the day. We would have that type. Imhotep, you know, the doctor and the architect and all of these other things. So having multiple disciplines that we're really, really good at is nothing new for us, you know. But the question, the conversation, all of that creates its own book list, and things get issued or handed out or passed along as time goes on, as we get to know one another, which again is revolutionary, because in this culture, we're encouraged to go the other direction. 150 billion Facebook friends, but don't nobody visit you in the hospital. I mean, it's that type of mindset that's completely counter to who it is we are. So even these little minor things, we begin to approach them a little bit differently. We'll start figuring out this is the way we've been doing shit for thousands of years. That's actually worked, as opposed to what we're doing now. So, didn't mean to step on any toes. Believe it or not, I wasn't really thinking about it, but, you know, wasn't on purpose. But yeah, I mean, it's books that I would want to put about Malcolm on there, because, you know, I'm about Malcolm all day. But, you know, time will tell.
I was going to say this: without intentional purpose of direct generational foundational action, which is what we talk about within our Panther Pledge, we lose our connection with direction. And as a people, that's exactly where we have to go back to and realize, is that we've lost our connection with direction because we don't recognize and understand what it means to have generational foundational development.
First 10 words you said, say that shit again in like human speed. I understand shit you said. All I had was a rhythm. It was good rhythm. I was vibing with it. Was nice. You know, I wanted to put a mash up on that shit, but I didn't catch any of those words. It was like Spanish. I forgot how to speak English. Oh my God.
Let me say, I say it without intentional, because it has to be intentional. Going into the word intentional, that means it's not haphazard. That means that I actually know what it is that I'm going into. So the word, the coin is intentional purpose. So we must have intentional purpose. So when someone wants to come into the organization, it is with intentional purpose that I come into the organization of being a Panther. Because oftentimes people are going into the organization because they've been hurt. That ain't an intentional purpose. That ain't me actually saying, you know what? I see myself as part of a collective, because as a people, we have to go back to being unified and recognize what it means to have collective empowerment. So as an intentional purpose as to why I'm a Panther, knowing that, what we recognize is as Panthers, we have to deal with what we call direct generational foundational advancement. So generational means that the elder, the middle, and the youth are all able to connect on a foundation, which means a baseline of operation, a baseline of being what we are. And then that advancement basically means that we are creating institutional work, institutional development, and institutional structures that will maintain foundational generational advancement. And if we don't have these things in place, then what we realize is that we lose our connection with direction. And saying that, what we're talking about now is the Sankofa or repair that needs to be done, because as a people, we have lost our connection with direction because we have not intentionally held on to foundational generational advancement. Is that slow enough?
Oh man, that was so much better. Don't try to be funny. Don't you know, you speak out enough of that Warridian shit. You put a beat to it, we got a problem. Specification. No. No.
All right. So again, by saying that, people that want to come into this movement, simply asking for a booklet, feel like just because I read a book, I'm gonna have this all of a sudden light bulb that turns on. But again, we have to go right back to the person that we are actually dealing with at that moment in time, which is why we have to address their appetite, their diet, and their digestion. So I have to look at this person and see what it is I'm dealing with. This is also why there are several things that we ask when we go into what we call just an interview questions that we deal with people coming into the party that just have interest in the party. This don't even mean you're gonna make it. This is simply interest, and we want to see how you answer these questions. There's a section on there that asks from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. What is your personal development on the following areas? Spirituality, culture, politics, health, financial literacy, economics, computer science, psychology, engineering. Those are just some. But the point being is we asked you, where do you see yourself at within those fields of study? Kind of going back to what Syke talked about earlier. The deal is according to where you see yourself, it lets us know really where you are. Because for one, another thing that we address is how do you see yourself and how do the people see you? See, that binary aspect is very important, because oftentimes you find that people actually think that folks see me the way I see me. And we have a rude awakening when we find out that's not really the case. Is that you think you know something because you don't know that you don't know. And in reality, you don't know a damn thing. And so therefore the people don't see you as you see yourself. One of the biggest problems with social media nowadays is because people can create this virtual persona of who they are. Then they're projecting what they would like to be seen as. But when you step into the real world with boots on the ground as a Panther, you come to find out that this virtual reality and their theme song that you done created on your site ain't gonna follow you around in real life. So therefore, people are gonna see you according to their experiences and what they've learned, not what you would like somebody to see you as. So just because you put on a beret and you like folks to see you as a Panther, if ain't nothing coming out of you that is of importance, of power, and of enlightenment and uplifting, then you're not representing a Panther. They don't see a Panther. They see some stupid dude. So we have to really be able to recognize this. So it's not just giving you a book list. It's starting with what we call a precursor of the state of condition that you have to be in just to be able to go into the aspect of studying. That's why Syke constantly hits people on discipline. But again, you have to know where you are first so that you know what needs to be tuned up, so that you can admit that you have a poor appetite, a poor diet, and therefore everything you've been digesting have led you down a situation where you're not ready. You're not ready to step into the role yet of being a Panther, and now you need to step back and change those appetites so that you can digest what's really going on. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Self-diagnostic. I approve. Good job.
I thought he was shooting at you, E, when he kept talking about poor diet. I thought he was.
You know what my diet is? What the hell does that mean? You know what my diet?
No,
hey man,
no, I'm messing with you.
I'm growing more and more. My matter of fact, I'm getting ready to do my first bunny. I got my freezer. I just got to give me the right knife so I can cut it up right. It's going down. I'm living the culture. Yeah, anyway, that's what you go to. Oh, and see, that's another thing. Look here. White people like to talk about one of the things they throw out with science, you know, one of their ideas that they think they came up with is time travel. When in reality, if we understand our own selves, it's like War was talking about in his own big worded, bouncy kind of rhythmic way, muddled that you can't understand, was that the concept of time travel is simply pulling on the past and developing the future and being conscious of it. Being in a reality where we pay attention to the ones that came before us for the sake of doing what it is we're here to do, which is to create more us in a positive, healthy way that develops us culturally and communally, as a family. And so the concept of Pan-Africanism involves not only all African people that are walking the earth right now at this minute, whether it's the North Pole, South Pole, East, West, wherever it is, but also those that have always existed and the ones or have existed always in the back and will exist always going forward. So if we're not in tune with that, if we're not in line with that, or if we're not asking those types of questions, that puts us at another mindset that has to be approached. And that's I think one of the sticking points with the whole book list and the party, because there was such a huge element of our culture, or our culture period, missing from that. And so I guess the first thing, because back in the day we had this same type of argument where everybody that was coming in was getting hit with the let's face it, the death and destruction that was Huey and them. It was catastrophic. It was necessary. There were beautiful things that came out of it. But when it's all said and done, a lot of lives were lost. A lot of, minds were messed up behind the things that happened. And so a part of that conversation that we used to have was culture, even playing a role, and not basing our movement towards something on really what's our fear of what it is we're running from, because that's what that part was. From my vantage point, what I've studied, Huey and them were running from. That's what that was. They were the slave getting away from the plantation. They didn't know quite where they were going because they kept quoting Chairman Mao and Marx and all these other folks who were basically took our shit, did whatever they did to it and gave it back. So there was no reference point being us, and no people freeze themselves without that reference point being themselves. It just doesn't happen in whatever part of life you want to talk about. And so, and that's no disrespect to Huey and them. Like I said, it was a necessary part, but we have to recognize the splitting of what's been happening and the breaking down. And part of the issue has been that lack of culture. So I know for me, that's the starting point. That's the interjecting. We all have some concept of what we're running from. We're running. In fact, maybe that's even more so. We don't even know what we're running from. We're just running. We're just confused. We're just lashing out, and we're protesting again, and we're BLM and supporting Palestine and everything else because we're not quite sure what it is we're running from. We're just in the habit of running. So not only do we not know where we're going, i.e. culture, what is it we're supposed to have and know that we got there, now we're free. We don't know that, but we also don't know what exactly it is we're running from. Or men, women, and, women or men, and black, white, girls, boys, tall, and it's just utter confusion. It makes no sense. And so we have no solid foundation for even what it is we're running from. We're just in the habit of running. And not only that, with no concept of who we are, we can't possibly know where it is we're running to. And so these are some of the thoughts and the ideas and what it is, the conversation about book lists and who's on the book list and where do we start and all of that has to begin there. And I like the reference for the Browder file because it doesn't really weigh in either direction. It kind of informs the culture, that the subculture or the blackface culture that we practice now. That's not even our culture. But that's at least one of the books that almost always is a starting point in these conversations that we have. Whether it's on an official list or not is another thing. But I mean, even if somebody's read it, from my vantage point, my first thing is, well, go read it again and let's have a conversation about it. Because it's a conversational tool. It's something to build and network on and go in all of these different directions. So
say this, let me still break down a little bit more on that, because as Panthers, I would just say this. A lot of people that are Panthers that may be asking these questions because they're still trying to find their way. That simply goes back to what we call our local objectives, because our local objectives tells us that as Panthers, if there's things that we need to be doing in the community when it applies to be to dealing with empowerment, we approach it with what we call our 3Ds, which is define, develop, and defend. And the concept of define, develop, and defend is supposed to give you a principled guidance on what topics and what things that you need to be addressing in your community in order to create levels of empowerment. The problem with that is too often when we talk about defining, developing, and defend what is in the best interest of the Black people and the community in particular, in general, I mean, then we don't know what that means. Why? Because again, going back to the appetite, I haven't yet defined myself. I haven't yet defined what it means to be a Panther. I haven't yet defined what an actual community looks like and supposed to be like. That takes us to what we call the 3Ps, which oftentimes a lot of Panthers are not getting that within their curriculum plan. The 3Ps is your perception, because it is your perception that is going to determine what you call a definition or how you define something. And then the next P will be the pursuit. The pursuit goes again into that whole energy that's driving somebody to have an appetite. Because if I don't have a proper appetite, meaning I don't have a something to anchor my pursuit to actually improving myself, family, and community, those three things are the trifecta, then there's not going to be anything I'm able to develop, going back to that second D, because I don't have the right pursuit. I don't have the right appetite to move in the right direction. So I can't develop the organization, the chapter, the next Panther in line, because I don't have my pursuit in order. Third P being preservation. How do you preserve this from generation to generation as Panthers? Because it is that preservation that creates the concept of being able to defend the structural integrity of what it means to be a Panther. Because integrity is at the root of everything we do. So you have to have that. So if I don't know my 3Ps, I can't actually deal with the 3Ds. And so I think that's part of the problem that a lot of Panthers are not seeing. And by not seeing these foundational things before you even go into bringing up the next Panther and how and what to study, it sets the framework on how to go about studying. And so we have to have those things in place. And then the 3Ps also go into overall what we call the 3Rs, which is to restore, renew, and reproduce. So you have your 3Ds, your 3Ps, and then your 3Rs. The three Ps have to precede a precursor to 3Ds. And then when you have the 3Ds down, then what they do is they bring in the 3Rs. And so there's a process that should be at the very beginning of what it means to be a Panther that'll help you to recognize how to even go about properly studying, so that you can now look at the right books in the right order in order to take you into the right framework of even wanting to be able to be a Panther and be a productive Panther, because at that point now you're dealing with your studies. And I also like to add on, when we talk about the 3Ps, which again was from the standpoint of perceive, pursue, and preserve, I also talk about when it comes to studying, having the right study in place. The 3Ps that I deal with is philosophy, psychology, and physics, because I call those the three Ps of study. Because the philosophy is going to take you into the overall framework in terms of questioning, in terms of being able to scientifically analyze and approach everything through a scientific method. Now, the psychology goes and takes you into the mind of the individual, the mind of the people, through the different branches of psychology, because you have to be able to know how to reach your people. You have to know where you are. You have to know your cognitive analysis and what makes you, what makes you tick, so you can focus and develop and work on those. You have to recognize personality types. So these are the aspects of psychology that you got to learn. You got to know how to deal with the people that has been damaged. So from a psychological standpoint, how do you address the damage that has been done to us? And how do you go into being able to repair? when we talked about the 3 R's: repair or restore or renew, so that you can reproduce something that is productive and essential to what it means to deal with a panther. And then when we talk about physics, now we have to address natural law, and we have to address everything that has to do with what keeps the world intact and what keeps us on the right path. And a lot of people may ask themselves, well, why physics? Give you a good example of physics. A lot of people don't recognize that currency, the concept of currency, comes from the concept of current, which has to do with the flow of electrons or the flow of energy patterns. What I'm saying don't make sense. Go check out a book that has been that goes into how currency or money and finance has been weaponized against the people. It's called Quiet Weapons for The Quiet Weapons for Silent Wars. That actually, the breakdown of one with the Rothschilds in terms of what they use to be able to sedate and keep the people in a slave state as it applies to economics. They're using the whole aspect of electronic circuits as the breakdown of how economics work, which again goes into physics. When you talk about resistance and you talk about liberation, you got to talk about what it is. What does resistance mean? What is the root of resistance? How do you produce work? All of these things are covered in physics. The problem is we haven't developed and seen a real world application as organizers in terms of what physics mean on the battlefield of social revolution. And so we have to be able to draw ourselves into the right mind frame, again, the right headspace, which goes back into being able to digest things the correct way. Because I can read something about physics, but if I'm not able to digest the material because it's above my learning abilities, my cognitive abilities, then I'm not going to know how to use it. I'm not going to know how to apply it toward what it means to be a panther. And so those 3 P's to me have to be studied and dealt with together: philosophy, psychology, and physics. So those are the way I go into anything that I'm going to study, is being able to hit on it from those levels.
I want to share some with you brothers, and share some with the listening audience, because I believe I've shared this with y'all before. When I was in the dungeons of North America, I was sitting down there, and I was tasked with trying to essentially do what we're doing now, bring about a process of study, to share a process of study. And when I sat down, I wrote, I guess you can call it an essay, but I wasn't thinking of it from the perspective of an essay, but I wrote down a blueprint for the process of study called the science of building. And in that science of building, there are a few points that I touched on for a lot of the new brothers who were just starting in their studies. So we're talking about somebody, and it's more universal than just being directed at a Panther, but it did have its Panther influence, because that was my background and that was my influence. So that's the perspective that I kind of talked to brothers from while we was down there. But anyway, to get to a point, and I won't read or break this whole thing down in one long, because I'm pretty sure that it's certain points that you brothers are gonna want to touch on. I'm pretty sure of that. But to start off the way it started off, I start off probably every part of this, and I end every part of this with a quote from somebody who is either wise or an ancestor who done already passed, or someone who has put in their own level of study to validate the information that they're sharing and giving with other people. So anyway, in the beginning, I take a quote from the RZA. RZA has a book called The Tao Wu, from the Wu-Tang Clan. In the beginning of the science of building, the first thing starts with building your own mind. And in building your own mind, I use a quote from RZA from the Tao Wu, and he said, "Jewels are minerals, compressed pieces of earth, stacks of crystalline carbon. What gives them shine is their history. It's the same with man. When a man recognizes himself, he recognizes his true jewel. His body expresses that wisdom. He becomes a jewel himself. If his mind is sharp, the way he walks and talks has a certain beauty about it. Attain wisdom, and you will have all the bling you will ever need." And for me, that's the whole purpose of study. For me, that attainment of wisdom is why a person even goes down the path of picking up their first book, why they would even read the broader file and advance to all the different levels of study, because they're trying to shine their true jewel, which is their mind. I say it all the time. It's a evolutionary gift that the human being got, that made it the superior, the supreme creature on the planet, the premier creature on the planet. And it's not a greater physical strength than every other animal on the planet. It's not greater speed. It's not the ability to fly. It's not the ability to turn into a chameleon and blend into the environment. It's none of those things that made the human being the premier creature on the earth. It's none of those things that did it. The thing that did it was the advancement of the human brain, which in evolutionary terms evolved at a much faster rate than any other brain on the planet. And that brain, that ability to think, that ability to even improve your ability to think through study. Not only do we have the ability to think, we actually have the ability to improve our thinking abilities through studying. And that's what Rizzo was just talking about in that introduction that I utilized from him for that science of building. But I said that the first thing you have to do is go through the process of building your own mind. You can't build anything until you've built your own mind, and that's the heart and the foundation of this conversation tonight. And I'm gonna read a little bit, something that I don't advise a person do if they giving a public speak. But when you just chopping it up and building, I mean, even in doing study groups, you reading this, all right. Reading with and the reason I say don't read when you speaking to somebody or when you giving a public speech, because we have the tendency to become monotone when you read. You have the tendency to just be going through those words with no emotion or with no pronunciation. You just reading words, and that becomes boring. The monotones of your voice automatically makes people stop paying attention to what you're saying. So the reading becomes a useless exercise. But anyway, to get to the point, the first step in the building process is the building of your own mind. This is done by studying so that you can acquire more and more knowledge to base your decisions in life off of. Many will attempt to separate knowledge into two categories: common sense and book knowledge. This is an error that is usually proposed by those who lack so-called book knowledge. And I know y'all have heard that before. When a person say, man, I got common sense. You might got book knowledge, but I got common sense. They might even use another term, a slang term, and say, you might have book knowledge, but I got street knowledge. I got street sense. This is what the person is saying. And I took the time to break these terms down, because y'all know how I can be with words. I took the time to break this down, and what these words, I ain't as lengthy as Wall, but I took the time to break these words down and put some definition, some perspective to them. When people say the difference between book knowledge and common sense. Anyway, they attempt to raise common sense above book knowledge. But what is common sense? Let's do a build and break the words down quickly. What is common sense? The word common literally means the average or base. That's literally what the word means, the average or the base or the general, the baseline of what you're going to get. It is a word used to define the ordinary and what's expected. For example, the common person has 2 legs. The common person has 2 arms. The common person has a head. So it's common. It's what we expect. There's nothing out of the ordinary with seeing that when you're dealing with a human being. Anyway, the word sense means to perceive or to feel. To perceive by the sense organs. Webster's 6th definition is the capacity for effective application of the powers of the mind as a basis for action and response. Or essentially, we can use the word intelligence. That's when we saying, man, that boy there got sense. We're saying that, man, that person has learned how to actually apply the powers of the mind toward the utilization of creating strategies to better help them maneuver through reality. That's essentially what you're saying when you say that person has sense. Anyway, so, and then Webster, I like to go into the words. So y'all got to bear with me for a moment while I go into these words. So, Webster breaks this down. He breaks this down and analyzes this even further when we just really go into the meaning of the words for us by defining sense in 3 evolutionary stages. Basically, Webster, when we say somebody has sense has 3 evolutionary stages that take place in the mind. The first evolutionary stage of sense in the mind is common sense. That's the base. The second is judgment, and the third is wisdom. So sense can develop through common sense, through judgment, and through wisdom. And this is how it takes place. So the definition of sense implies a reliable ability to judge and decide with soundness, prudence, and intelligence. That's what the word sense means. I'm intelligent enough. Common sense suggests an average degree of such ability without sophistication or special knowledge. That's what common sense is. It's sense without any sophistication or special knowledge. It's just the average baseline things that you figured out. You done figured out, being on the planet for the last 69 years, you figured out that you're supposed to go to the toilet to urinate. You figured this out. And that's basically what common sense is. You didn't figure it out. You didn't have to go to no classes for it. You didn't have to sit with no master builders. You had enough sense to figure out to go to the toilet and take a leak. And,
yeah, it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, pretty fundamental. So that's common sense. Then we move to judgment. Judgment implies sense tempered and refined by experience, training, and maturity. That's what judgment is. It's separated from basic common sense. And wisdom implies sense and judgment far above the average. So basically what we're being told is that sense, which can be simply defined as the ability to make good decisions, has three stages of growth. At the common level, there's common sense. Once you gain more experience, training through study and maturity, you gain judgment. And if you seek the rewards of a master builder and you're willing to put in the real work, then you get wisdom. As we can see, a person moves from common sense to judgment and then to wisdom because of experience, going through things, training, study of material, and maturity for development. Why would a person want to stay at the level of common sense when they could have so much more? So this I took that long-winded way to break all that down because to me it kind of describes or explains why study is necessary. I said we're the premier creature on the planet. We are that because of the development of this brain, which evolved this mind, this conscious thinking mind, which evolved this. This mind has the ability to not only to think, but it has the ability to think about what I just thought. No other creature on the planet has that. And if that gives you a premier position on the planet, then you have to understand this. This, and a lot of you, the listening audience, need to take a seat when you hear this one. Those who put in the work of study put themselves at a premier position over those who refuse to put in the work to study. And it's just simple as that. If the human being has the premier position of an animal because it can't study, then the human being that's doing the study has a premier position over the human being that refuses to study. And it makes all the sense in the world when you think about it. You're leaving yourself at the common level. And I think this is very, very important to understand. Next, in order to start any kind of real study, and I think Brother E and Brother Ward touched on it, you first must understand where you're trying to go. You have to understand what it is that you're trying to erect, what it is that you're trying to construct, what it is you're trying to create. Because once you understand that, then that tells you what material you need to start reading. That tells you what it is if you're trying to become a professional bodybuilder, then 9 times out of 10, you need to start reading a lot of fitness and nutrition books. You need to start reading and studying, not only that, but autobiographies from people who have accomplished that goal. Because one thing that we learn in reading is that when you study and when you read, especially when we read about people, there are formulas there. There are always formulas telling us how to do something. There is nothing new under the sun. There's no brand new stuff that you got to make up. I promise you, it'll take less time to go down to the spot and go buy you some tires than start trying to figure out how to create a wheel. It's some things are just, the returns are not as well, it's not as good. And there are formulas for everything. If you want to do it, if you have to do a prison bid, I ain't gonna say want to, but if you have to do a prison bid, I did not know how to do a prison bid. Didn't know how to do it. Had never done one. And I didn't want to do it the way that dudes that was meeting you in the prison was telling you how to do it. I didn't want to do it that way because they were talking about some nonsense. The advice that they gave upon entering prison will keep you deaf, dumb, and blind if you listen to that. And because of my background and had already been doing building at that time for 6 years, I had 6 years of building at the time, but had already been building. I knew that what they was telling me to do with my time didn't make any sense. Keep in mind, I was 25 when I went. So what I did, my common sense told me, let me study some dudes that I respect that have done time. So I looked at it and I said, let me study Malcolm. Malcolm did 7 years. Malcolm had a 13-year Malcolm had 13 counts of a 13-year sentence. He did 7 on it before he made parole. So I said, let me study Malcolm. Let me reread the autobiography. Let me see how Malcolm spent his time. Let me see what Malcolm did. What did Malcolm read? How did Malcolm utilize his time throughout the courses of his day? You know what I'm saying? One of the reasons why I got in college and took sociology, because their tests, their final exams was all debate. There was no written exams. It was all debate. It was based on what you could study, the research you could pull in, and how well you could present your ideas. And that's something that I got out of the Malcolm book. I read Mumia Abu-Jamal, his books, Live from Death Row, and to man, 3 of them I read. I can't remember the name of the other 2. I'm embarrassed for that because I love these books. But and the second one that he wrote, I actually appreciated it more than the first one. But I read him because Mumia Abu-Jamal at the time had been gone 30-some years. This man was on death row, and this man became a Pulitzer Prize winner. So that was something that I could respect. Even Nelson Mandela, the man did 27 years. So I studied Nelson Mandela, George Jackson. These are people who utilize their time in a way that I could respect. So I was looking for the formulas in those brothers. I was looking for their formulas, how they got through the process. That's why I say that it's important to know where you're trying to go in order to make sure that you're picking the right information in order to start your process of study. Anyway, I didn't have to read all that because I remembered it all because I wrote it. But I remembered it all, and I actually practiced it. I actually did those things. Also, which moves to the second level of study, which deals with how to read. When you're reading, you have to, like I just said, you have to look for formulas. I'm not going to go into all that again. But you also, when you're reading, you must learn how to 3D that thing. I call it 3D in it, meaning that you have to take those words. I visualize when I read. You have to take those words off the page. Reading a whole bunch of symbols on a page, on a white page, white background, ain't that all that entertainment. Take that words off that page and imagine it. Let it come into your imagination. You know what I'm saying? Let it come into the nation of images. Actually bring it off the page and actually let it actually play it out in your head. And I think it was College that said that you got to see yourself, your condition, and your way out of your condition. And everything you read, put yourself in the story. Don't just dry read all this information and be able to quote these statistical facts. Put yourself in the story and let yourself actually allow yourself to have an emotional moment in the things that you're reading. Because if you allow yourself and you allow that imagination to play its part, if you allow that to happen, if you allow that divine goddess part of the mind to take over while you're taking in that logical information, you'll see some magical things taking place in your understanding and your comprehension. So that's how you read. Don't pass up not one word that you don't understand. Don't just read the book and just flow through the words and you know for a fact that you don't have a working definition of that word, but you keep going, you're going to lose the entire sentence. The dictionary can work like an oracle for you. If you don't know the meaning of the word, again, I got it out of the autobiography of Malcolm. Malcolm copied the entire dictionary down. I didn't do it like that, but every word that I did not have a working definition of, and I mean, when I say working definition, if somebody said, what does that mean? And it could be a word that you use your entire life. If you cannot define that word, just say, man, everybody know what it means. That means you don't know what it means. That's what it means. That means now it's time to look it up. I'm gonna give you an example. I'm gonna give you an example of something that it just surprised me. It's not amazing, but it did surprise me. The word decide, what the word literally means. You know, the word decide, the etymology of the word is that, and if you think about it, everybody that heard this will automatically agree with it. The word decide literally, it comes from the assumption that all of our choices, our mind is floating in the clouds, it's way up in the clouds, because we have 15 different things that we could possibly do. 15 different ways I can utilize my time when I get up in the morning. And you might be in a position where you have not made your mind up about what you're going to do, about what next move you're going to make. And that's what the word decide literally means. The word D literally means to bring down. And the word side literally means to kill. That's what the word literally means. Think of the word homicide. Homicide means to kill another Homo sapien. Suicide, sua is Greek for self. So suicide means to murder self. Herbicide is a poison that kills herbs. You know, you can go on and on. So the word side means to kill. Literally, the word side comes from the Latin, which means sear, which means to kill by cutting. But the word side literally means to kill. So to decide means to bring down, or to start bringing your mind down from the clouds and start siding, killing off all the other options until you have one option left, which is to decide. And when you understand a word like that and you're reading, it helps you to comprehend what that sentence is saying a whole lot better. And you'll improve your vocabulary. You'll improve your ability to comprehend and understand. This happens even when we're talking, not just when we're reading, but when we're talking. When people have a false understanding of what a word means, and you say that word to them, they'll automatically be triggered by a word that they really don't comprehend. They think they comprehend the word, but because they don't know what the word means, and and even worse, they have a false understanding of what the word means, they get triggered, sometimes angrily, when it's not even called for that. I said all that. Anyway, next thing that you'll find that's important when studying is to always take notes. Always. And this is what I'm about to say right now isn't the law, but me myself when I read a book, because some brothers take extreme care of their books. Me, and I love my books, but I'm gonna mess mine up. Mine gets messed up. I write in my books. Those definitions I just talk about, I put those definitions on the side. I highlight certain points that need to stand out, and I make my own table of contents in the back, usually on the back flap. And if it's extra pages back there, I use that to go back to major points. And when I take notes, the way that I take notes, just to show y'all what I'm talking about, this shows you how much note taking I do. The way that I take notes is I write down the note, the fact. I know y'all can't see all that, but I write down the fact. I write down the page, the book that it comes from, the author, and the page that it comes from, and all of my notes. Again, I said when you read, look for formulas. Where did I get that idea from? J.A. Rogers from Man to Superman. When he tell the story, from Superman to Man. When he tell the story, if you read the book is told in a story form. That the guy is on the train riding with another guy, and they having a discussion. And the guy, the black guy, he pulls his book. He pulled his book of life out, in which he took all the different notes that he studied from, and he's spitting. He's spitting, and he's using his references because he took the pages down, the authors down. So he ain't just talking and giving you his opinion. He giving you proof of what it is and who he studied. He giving you proof of his information. And that's where I got that from. I said, oh, that's a good formula. So I took that and I started utilizing that in my own personal studies. So you got to take notes of anything that stands out, any interest, because the thing about it, you got to understand, is the easiest way to memorize any information is to be writing the information down. When I was in those day rooms, brothers used to ask me this all the time. And I remember this one brother, he did a good joke. I laughed at it. He said, brother, not only are you reading all the time, now you writing the books down. You know what I'm saying? To him, that was just crazy. It's already bad enough that you spend your whole day reading. Now you're turning around and you're writing the books down, because writing is a psychoneuromuscular activity. That process of writing, not only are you reading, but then you're using your neuromuscular part of your body, your neurons and your muscles, to actually move in order to copy those symbols down, which actually processes it through the brain. And you read it again because you want to make sure that you're not misspelling the words that you're writing, or you're doing any typos. So it helps you to memorize information. So it's probably one of the most beautiful ways of retaining long-term information. I believe it's why in the Nation of Islam you was required to write down your lessons as you went, because you had to study and be able to recite those lessons verbatim. Again, looking for processes or formulas. I utilized that in those lessons too, because I saw the importance of it. Anyway, you brothers got something to say, because I know I done got long-winded, and I got a few more things I'm gonna say, because I'm gonna talk about the tools that I think every real builder needs. But go ahead, brother. Look like you got something on your mind.
Okay, if he ain't got nothing, then I jump in. I would just call what you're saying right now is going back to what I said when I say learning with intent and internal, and also the process you're talking about is called internalizing the book, because I kind of make fun of people that just simply think because they memorize something, because like for instance, Panthers come in and they memorize a 10-point platform, But then I turn around and ask them, well, what does that mean to you? And they can't give me an answer to that. But they can recite something, because to memorize doesn't mean that you've internalized. So there's two different things that you're dealing with when we talk about that. And with that, I kind of want to go back to what you talked about with the concept of sense, because I use it from a different angle. Because I look at sensory input, period, when we talk about the entire body, sensory input, and I come from the perspective of martial science. In martial science, we would deal with that as common sense, advanced sense, and supreme sense, because you're talking about everything within your sensory input in the levels in which it is able to operate. So we have the common sense, which is what everybody's able to deal with, advanced sense, and then your supreme sense. So to me, those are the three levels of sensory input and sensory response. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And I will give credence to Kalindia, the founder of Tamarian martial arts, for bringing me into that sense of awareness. And he actually talked about studying in what he referred to as 4D. So when you talked about being able to sit back and take that object or whatever that it is within your study, your framework, and try to look at it and play with it, we did the same thing with martial science, but we also applied that across all areas of life. And so, unlike what most people think about when they think about martial science, or should I say martial arts in that standpoint, they tend to only apply toward either self-defense or they apply toward or discipline, but they don't look at it as a way of spiritual life. And so, from that standpoint, we refer to it as martial science, because you're dealing with the science of how you connect with everything around you and how everything is one with you. And that's when you get into that, what we call that supreme sense, because at that point you deal with the ability to know movements by observing any one object, and by observing that any one object, I'm able to see the connection between that object and everything else that's going on, without even actually observing those other things. This is how and why martial scientists were able to turn around and watch an insect and then apply that way that insects interacts with its environment into a fighting system, period. And then you get your fighting styles based upon of the observance of other things in nature. And so that's how that came about. And I say that because oftentimes people don't think about how do you first develop something? Because now when we talk about dealing with original thought, we have to talk about the fact that there is a certain way you have to internalize the things that are coming into you and being able to make it your own. Because if we don't know how to do that, we can't be visionaries. And if we can't be visionaries, we're not going to be able to see how to get out of a condition that has put us in a situation where we're being outpaced, or the oppression is outpacing our ability to liberate ourselves. Going back to what was stated earlier, I can't remember which one of y'all said when y'all was talking about a runaway slave. That's because people don't, like I think what was said, people don't know what they're running away from. They're just running. Well, that's the mentality of a runaway slave. Whereas we supposed to be, if we want to be Panthers, we're supposed to be liberators. And a liberator is not the same as a runaway. It's not looking at things the same way a runaway slave is, because a runaway slave is simply trying to get away from that condition. That goes back into when we talk about the coping mechanism. The coping mechanism has to do with being able to just navigate through obstacles of oppression, but you're not coming up with solutions. You're simply learning how to navigate and deal with oppression as it comes before you. And so you become a good person in terms of overcoming obstacles in the field, in the battlefield, but you're not removing these obstacles. And since you're not removing obstacles, you're simply coping with survival. You're not living, you're coping. And so we have to be able to be visionaries, and being a visionary means you have to be able to internalize the things that you study. And the only way you can internalize the things that you study is you have to be learning with intent. And if I'm learning with intent, then there's a reason for me to learn. I'm not simply doing it because I was told so. So you have to take this beyond the level of saying, well, the Panther 48 told you so. No, you have to be able to recognize the road that we're talking about, the track that we're taking you to, and then be able to embody that so that it becomes yours. And as it becomes yours, now you are able to add a new pattern to the pattern of existence that we're bringing you to. that goes to the point to where when you talk about the student all of a sudden now needing to break away from the teacher because the teacher said, I've taught you everything that you need to know. And the student don't want to let go because they don't feel like they're ready to exist in the world that they've been crafted and prepared for yet by the advanced training. The problem is they have to go out and experience life. They have to go out and realize that all of the tools that they've been taught, now it's time for you to utilize it. And so that means you internalize your lessons. And so I just need to throw that out there.
I'm gonna tack on to something you just said, which when you were talking about Panthers coming in, memorizing the 10-point platform, but when you ask them what does that mean to you, they can't explain it. They don't have an understanding. And the Huru Shule, when I developed those lessons down there, we had 3 stages of learning those lessons. Like in the beginning, for somebody to come into the study, they had to memorize the 10 virtues of a student. They had to memorize it. They had to memorize that, the 10 virtues of a student, and the definitions that were used to define those virtues. Control of thought, it had a definition that came with it. Control of thought is the ability to control your own mind and focus your thoughts constructively. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but they had to memorize it. Being able to memorize it and being able to recite every point or every virtue, we call that having knowledge, or 120, because the completeness of anything is 360 degrees. So we call that having 120, having knowledge. Being able to actually break those ideas down in your own words based on your own understanding and to apply them to the way you're living your own life moved you to the next, which was wisdom, which was 240 degrees. You had wisdom. Because one of the things we have to remember, and I'm going to get a little symbolic, because I like symbolism as much as I like words, is that knowledge is masculine. That original seed is masculine. It's the sun. So it radiates or projects. But wisdom is feminine. It reflects. That wisdom is the female, or it's the moon. It's when you're able to reflect what you know. You know, you've seen dudes that have a nice vocabulary and they can kick all kind of facts, but you don't see it doing anything for their life because they have the knowledge, but they don't have the wisdom. They're not letting the feminine part do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to reflect the knowledge and actually manifest, or to make it physical, make what you know become physical. It's also another reason why we call the things that we can touch matter, because they come from the mother. You know, that's why we call it matter. That's the root or the original meaning of the word. Anyway, and the last is understanding. Once you have 360, the understanding means that you can teach the process to another. So you had knowledge, you had wisdom, you had understanding. You had to go through all 3 levels of grasping the virtues. You can have knowledge of the virtue, which is the first part that lets you enter the school. Remember, anybody that knows the 10 virtues of a student, number 10, which you tend to think is completeness, is actually the beginning, because number 10 is preparedness for initiation. It means that you went through the other 9 just to be prepared to be initiated into the studies. So just knowing it's not enough. You have to reflect it. You have to gain wisdom of it. You have to be wise in your ways and your actions. Then you have to gain understanding. You have to move to the level of understanding, meaning that you can now birth another person. Your understanding of the information is so developed that you have the ability to birth another person into their knowledge so that they can start reflecting their wisdom and then gain understanding. That's the process. And a lot of times people get knowledge and they stop. They think that was all that they needed. They think that knowledge, being able to sound cool, being able to speak like Khalid Muhammad, that's it. That's all that I need. And that's not it. You know what I'm saying? And I wanted to speak on that to add to that. The last part that I was saying, I left this out, and I think this is important when you're studying, is then once you believe, which goes into what I just said on knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Once you believe that you know the information, whether you think you got the Broader file, you think you own that, everything Tony Broader said, you got it front and back, you can kick it in a conversation, write an essay on it. And the essay ain't got to be for anybody, but write an essay on it. If you think you know it, sit down, put the book in front of you, and just go to build and go to chopping with it. Actually, think about it from the perspective of, okay, I know the book, I read the book. How would I teach the book to another person? What are the fine points of the book in the Broader file? How would I break those down and touch on those fine points in the Broader file? Then you turn the Broader file itself into a study session, and you'll find that you just taught yourself a deeper level of understanding when it comes to the Broader file. Not only have it become deeper for you, but you've also developed a way to teach your brother or your sister when they just starting with their study of the Brighter File. So those different methods and those different ways will help continue your development and your growth and your understanding.
I used to do the same thing when I was in college, you know, and this is without knowing at the time that psych was doing this shit. But if you've ever studied, at least for me, some people think it's exciting, but network administration books that are like 300 or 400 pages long, and you got to know the stuff that's in there just as a base, but it puts you to sleep. It put me to sleep. So what I ended up doing was getting spirals and just copying the book word for word so I could focus and stay on point and continue without losing my train of thought and all of that to be able to absorb it, you know. But you ever considered what's really going on when you talk about reflection? It seems to me that reflection is actually a two-part process. It's both masculine and feminine, if you really get down to it. Because before it can project it back, reflect it out, so to speak, it has to first receive, which is the feminine, right? So there's the act of receiving the information that's being put across, and then turning around and projecting it, which is the same as what you were just saying. But to understand that where we're messing up is the ability to receive. We've been so plugged up with all the bullshit, with all the amusements and the food and, you know, whatever else goes on in our lives, we're not able to receive. So what we end up reflecting or projecting is actually somebody else's shit, because there's no room left in our mind to receive what it is we're now calling the words up from and throwing them back out. So that's the last thing that popped into my head. Oh, runaway slave. Look, that's not what I'm saying. A runaway slave, at the very least, knows that he's running away from slavery. We're beyond that. We don't know, because if these cats are out here, BLM and all of these cats, ask these black folks that's doing this, are you free? Are you actually in a free country? And so the conversation becomes, if you're not, and you can't say that you're a slave, then what are you fighting for? Wait a minute, I'm gonna get it back. When we have these conversations and ask folks that idea of, if you can't acknowledge that you're a slave, if you can't receive the idea that you were enslaved at this point, then there's no way that you can reflect a runaway slave culture. If you were just reacting to, oh, this hurt, or that hurt, or I saw this video on YouTube, so I'm gonna go out and do this, then you're simply running. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? That's not the runaway slave. The runaway slave knows that way is bad, so I'm gonna go this way. That's some type of direction. That's some type of recognition as to what I had is horrible. At this point, we don't realize that what we had is horrible, because we turn around and we purchase what we have that's horrible. We invest ourselves in what we have that's horrible. We don't get that idea of connecting those two things. It's been completely lopped off. So that's why I say we're zombies. We're running. Our feet are moving, but we're not running from anything. We're just moving. So someone drops us in a particular position and we take off running just because our feet are moving. It's not that we're running away. It's just our feet were moving. So we're running. We're automatic, systematic. We're robots at this point, which is a part of their culture. Don't think, just memorize and do. I think you call it rote memorization. It's never been my strong point. I couldn't tell you what year the Magna Carta was signed, but I could tell you the stuff that was involved, the ideas, the concepts, what types of stuff went on. I can tell you the dates, who signed it, what cities, and none of that. But that rote memorization is given a higher position in this country to be able to just piss it, to spit it back when somebody asks you these numbers, these facts, these figures. That critical thinking and whatnot, which is what all of this comes back to, is critical thinking applied to everything, the most fundamental, even the common sense, you know, critically analyzing and thinking that out. You know, so it's a worse state than I'd rather be a runaway slave. Like I said, we're just running. We're not even running away, because away implies something we're running from. We have no concept that we're even running from something. We're just running. So just a run.
I guess I'm ready to debate E on runaway slave, because when I think of a runaway slave, I don't necessarily equate a slave with knowing what freedom is.
See, that's the thing. It's not that the slave knows where it is. He just know where the fuck it ain't. We don't know that. We think we free, but we still gonna protest and holler and yell. You know, it's that shit that goes on like with the male-female thing. So they ask these chicks, you know, who has it better in this country? Oh, men have it way better. So would you rather be a man than a woman? Oh no. There's no reasoning. They have no idea. They just run. Somebody told them run, and everybody just started running. It's like being at the club, or one time we was at some event, and we was in the parking lot, and they started shooting, and everybody just started ducking. So it's that whole idea of what we do. If somebody says bang, or somebody say, oh, we got a gun, we all just start running. That herd mentality, just run. We don't know which direction because we ain't hear no shots. We don't know who got the gun. We just running. And that, in my mind, that's where we're at. We're just running because somebody said nigga, we run. You know, somebody said you a slave, we run. But we have no idea of what a slave is, what a slave ain't. If we don't know what freedom is, we can't know what not freedom is. You know, they come on, Mr. Duality. They come about at the same time. Your freedom is defined by your slavery. If you have no idea what your freedom is, you can't fucking know what your enslavement is, and vice versa. So that's why I say it's a detachment. It's like that last fucking detachment, our brain from the rest of our body. You know, we're just bodies walking around with no head to tell us where we're going or where we're coming from. We're just walking around, brain dead. So for me, that's the difference. And you said it yourself. You talked yourself out of an argument, homeboy.
Well, I would agree with you on that standpoint. That's coming from somebody who understands identity. So basically, I was forcing you to break that down a little bit more, so you would tap a light bulb on somebody's head, because somebody else was going to probably put in the comments, well, he don't know what a runaway slave is.
Mm-hmm. I used to. I forgot. It's been so long.
So you've answered that one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. I'm not gonna tell him. I'm not gonna tell it. But yeah. So, the idea that we've become, because we invest in so much superficiality. Again, that's their culture. And let me just say this as a side note to kind of reach back to something that was said, because I think it's pertinent. Because I know for me myself, I'll never stop hitting on the idea of white folk did this shit. White folk did some white. I'm going to say it, and you can take it as blaming if you want, but in my mind, blaming is being out at the club. Somebody steps on your shoe, and you turn around to the closest motherfucker to you and say, "Why did you do that?" That's blaming. You got no evidence. You got no reason to call this particular person out. You just saw somebody and went to town. That's not what we're doing. We're just telling you what the fuck happened. This is what happened. So it's not blame. It's revealing what's actually going on. And we have to acknowledge that these different points, being superficial, we don't do superficial. That's some European shit. It just is. I ain't blaming them. That's cool for them, but it don't work for us, which is one of the reasons that our written, so to speak, communication took the form of pictures, because we understand, we know that idea that those pictures get in more deeply to that subconscious than some words do. We are a different people from them, and we have to identify their culture and our culture and start making that weeding apart and realize that most of the shit, fuck it, all of the shit that we do to one degree or another either is directly theirs or has been madly affected by theirs. We have to always call that shit out and call it for what it is, because to sit back and say, oh, quit blaming white folk, quit being apologetic. If it's true, it's fucking true. It doesn't matter. And to sit up and give them a pass because somebody is telling the truth on them again, we will go crazy if that was black folks doing it up the street. We call that drama. But to give them a pass on something that you know happened, you can't argue it, but your feelings are telling you, you can't keep blaming white folks. It's not blaming if it's fucking true. So yeah, my bad.
Somebody said you need to get a job or something, find something better to do. Because you
Well,
how we brought up white folk. That's what they said. I
yeah,
think
they
think we
did,
don't-
and
yeah.
they really don't know what's going on. Because let me tell you, because I've adopted the lifestyle and whatnot that I've invested in, I not because I had to, not because somebody else decided, I left my last place of employment and decided I'm gonna chill for a minute. Bills are paid, got food, everything's copacetic. So you can have
Yikes.
your rat race and have 15 jobs and be chasing that dollar if you want. But I'm going to be kicking it with my chickens, doing what the hell I want, really want. Because nobody just really want to go out and grind for money all the time. I don't care how much money you're making. You talked about a class you did. You ain't pursuing the money. You're pursuing what it is you can do with the money. And lo and behold, your humble servant, Brother E, done figured out that you can do just as much shit that's just as much and way more fulfilling without chasing the money. We don't have to have money to live. We don't have to have money to survive. It's just a fucking fact. We don't want to work for it, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, so I'll get a job when I feel like it. How about that? I don't want to work right now.
Well, you talking about
how's your freedom? Huh?
You talk about the energy dynamics of living with intent. We ain't got to that yet. So if a person can't relate to that because they are not getting money with any intent to do anything to pursue themselves in a position of empowerment.
I know that because we have this concept that empowerment lies somewhere outside of the senses. But yet here we are, lo and behold, once again, I'm still chilling with my empowerment.
I got a story you just made me think of, E, that I learned. I can't remember where I got it from. I didn't make it up, but I can't remember who I got it from. But the story goes, there was a man, he was sitting on the bank of the river. He was fishing and he was catching fish, and he was catching a lot of fish because he had become proficient at fishing. And another man, a businessman, happened to be walking by, and he saw all the fishes. He saw the fish that the man had been able to catch. And he walked over to the man. And he said, man, you pretty good at this, ain't you? And the guy said, yeah, I'm pretty good. I enjoy fishing. He said, man, why don't you open up your business and start selling fish? The way you catch fish, you can make a lot of money. And the man that was fishing, he said, and then what? He said, well, when you start making enough money, you can hire you some workers, and therefore you won't have to fish. You could just hire workers to do the fishing. He said, and then what? He said, then you can open up another fish store further in another town where you can sell more fish. And he said, and then what? He said, and then once you got all these different fish stores going and you got all this money being made, you don't have to worry about running the day-to-day operations of the business. And the man that was fishing said, and then what? Then you can come out here and you can sit here and you can fish all day. So he's like, he caught it at the end, like, God, I'm telling him to stop doing what he's doing, to go through this whole rat race to earn the right to do what he's doing. And it's just something to think about. You just made me think about that, E. But another thing that I said in the process of study is that you have to cross-reference your material. You can't just read one book can't just let it be the broader fire, and that's all you know about the African story. That can't be it. You have to cross-reference this material to make sure you're not reading a hack, because there's a lot of hacks out there. To make sure that you're reading the right, and when you cross-reference the material, I believe that you should read one from a Eurocentric author, and you could read one from an African-centered author, E, because E don't like the Afrocentric. But you should read one from an Afrocentric author. Why? One, you should read the Eurocentric author's work so that you don't be biased in your breakdown. Two, you should read the Afrocentric author's work, African-centered author's work, because he's probably going to give you a more less biased point of view. One thing about it, and let's just be honest, Europeans are notorious with making the story fit their needs. They will switch, change, and hide that story from you. So that's why we have to read the African scholars. But you also need to read the European scholars. I found that to be a very powerful tool when I was incarcerated, especially when it came to debating, because you had the white debaters, the white thinkers. They would come with the white scholars. And a lot of times you'd find the pro-black righteous brothers not having the ability to debate them from that perspective. I could go right into the book, could tell them when they was lying, because they thought they could bring up somebody like Van Loon or Herod or any of these guys, and then you would be lost. A lot of these brothers, they heard Tony Browder. They heard of John G. Jackson. They heard of John Henry Clark. And so you bring up their works, they could talk. They could communicate a little bit. But when they brought up the white authors, they couldn't communicate. You want to make sure that you got a double-edged sword and you can come from all perspectives. You want to make sure that you can go there with it, that you could tell our story. One thing about that made Sheikh Diop so good, because he didn't just tell the story from historical point of view, he also could get into the genetical conversation. He can get into the anthropological conversation. So you want to put like he said, in ancient times, us being multidisciplinary was nothing. That was the norm. That was just something that we did. And we got to get in the habit of being able to cross-reference our material so we can make sure that we're writing exact on point when we're bringing about information and when we're trying to teach another person. And I'm gonna share. We got 14 minutes left, so I'm gonna share these tools right quick. These are tools, not principles, but these are tools that you could use in the process of developing the mind. Look at E cocking his head. I was doing that as a shot to you. These are tools that you can use in the process of developing your mind. These are tools that you need. Now, keep in mind, y'all, when I wrote this, I was in prison. So some of this stuff is obsolete right now. I wrote this when I was in prison. I was writing this for other people that was in prison who had just started studying. So a lot of this stuff is going to be obsolete, but we can figure out what to change this to. But I said, one, you need to have you a good dictionary and thesaurus. Again, understanding the language that you use, the words. Eve talked about the reason why our language, our written word was actually pictograms. It was pictures, because we understood how the mind worked. And if you think about it, I just told you to interpret what you was reading, the words, into pictures earlier. I said 3D the concept. When you're reading, actually let that thing become images in your mind, imagination. Take it to the nation of images. Take it off this physical plane. Take it off of this material thing. Take it from these words and actually turn it into pictures, into images in your head, and you'll start seeing things a whole lot deeper. But that's why I like words, because understanding those words give you the ability to do that. Like I just explained what D-side means. I could see yourself coming down out of the sky, healing off all the other possibilities, and then creating a foundation of what you're going to move on. I just made a decision. I just decided, and that's what the whole thing comes with: understanding the words, understanding what these words mean, and understanding how to comprehend what you was reading. Second, two, is to read a good history of the development of human beings and civilization. Reading a good history, y'all know I always quote. It's 3 books that I quote. One is Dr. Kirk Harrod and Who Are We, which is one of those books from a white author. One of them is When the World Was Black, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Those are the 3 books, which is a black author. So reading those books will give you a good history of the development of civilization and the development of human beings themselves. Both of those books go into detail of how the human being evolved, the development of the brain, the evolution of the mind, and then how we start building civilizations, cities, cultures. It breaks all those things down. And I think it's very important to understand those things. Third, study African and African American history. They're kind of separate. Because when we think of African American history, we only go so far back. We only go back to a peanut. But these things we need to know these things too. We need to know what the Black Panther Party did, their wins and their failures, the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, the Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. These things are important to know. Great books like They Came Before Columbus, things like this will give you a lot of history on African American struggle, African American thought, all of that. Brother E talked about the Harlem Renaissance. He go into all that in that book. I think it's Lerone Bennett Jr. He goes into all that. But it's also important, again, we started with the broader file, to read books like The Nile Valley Contribution to Civilization, Sheikh Diop's Civilization of Barbarianism, things like that. Going into those books, Civilization of Barbarianism, a little bit thicker, and Sheikh Diop being the type of scholar he is, he take you into deeper detail in a lot of this information. But reading this this will give you an understanding of your heritage. If you was Asian or Latin, any other ethnicity, you should read that stuff that ties you to your culture. But for Black people, this is very important for them to read to start understanding how far we've come, been taken away from. Another reason why I think the person said, stop blaming. Well, we it's important to understand how the matrix. I'm going to get off topic just a little bit. it's important to understand how the matrix works. It's very important. And there is nothing new under the sun. Y'all got to understand that you got to look for things and see formulas. It's called inoculation. They do this thing to you when it comes to when it comes to a cold. They'll give you a slight minor version of it so that your immune system can strengthen against it. So that when you're met with the cold or the flu, you actually won't catch it because you've been inoculated. And the same thing happens with the things that you need to know. When you hear African, it's a reason why you cringe, why you want to get away from that. You don't want to identify with it. You've been inoculated against who you are and yourself. You got to understand this. It's a reason why when you hear somebody say something quote unquote bad about white people, you get defensive. It's a reason for it. You've been inoculated. You've been trained to defend an enemy and go against a hero, a helper. You've been trained to do this, and everything in you gets automatically defensive when you're faced with those things. You don't want to hear. It's certain words that people can say that's going to trigger you, and it's going to trigger an automatic response in you to make sure that you stop listening. And you got it. That's one of the things that you have to beat. And that's one of the reasons why we're studying the way we're studying, because we're trying to mentally free ourselves from that way of thinking. So you can't be so afraid just because this is 2024. This is not 1930 where you're terrified of saying white people. I mean, this is just ridiculous. There should be no reason for that. There should be no reason for that. And again, I just said it before, I'm not the type, me and Eden debated on this channel before about this subject matter because like he said, I'm going to constantly say it. And we got to understand why Malcolm and them was so incendiary at that time and why they chose to come the way they came. They had to come to destroy the ideal of the boogeyman white man in your mind. They had to do it because you were so afraid. So when Malcolm came, Malcolm was on national TV saying the devil and this and that and saying things that other black people agreed with, but they were terrified to say. And because Malcolm showed that example, that birthed the new generation of rebellious youngsters that became the Black Panther Party, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and organizations like that. They was more rebellious, because they had the example of Malcolm to build on. These things was necessary, and they were, and what has happened over time, a lot of the people that have been woke up, because you don't have that George Jackson. Well, I can't say that, but that George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson. You have it, but the energy has been directed incorrectly. George prophesied about what he called, excuse my language, the new nigga. And he said he won't be afraid. He said he'll be a fighter. He will understand how to use the gun. He will understand he will know how to fight. He's a whole different breed. He don't step off the sidewalk. He's different. And he was right about him coming. And he exists. This is the street nigga, the street soldier, the gangster. This is him. Only problem is his anger, his frustration, and his warrior code has been completely misdirected. Because if George Jackson saw him coming, somebody else saw him coming too, and they put him in a position to make him turn all of that anger and frustration on himself. So sometimes this language or this conversation is needed. It's important to hear it. It's very important to hear it. And that's why you have to study your history. Because once you start understanding where you come from and how far from where you was that you are now, it'll click back on in your mind. It'll turn back on. Anyway, and I can't believe that you could actually be any kind of true revolutionary. It's kind of what the brothers was talking about between the difference of a runaway slave and a liberator. The difference between a rebel and a revolutionary is the fact that a rebel knows what he wants to go against. A revolutionary knows where he's trying to get to. And that's a big difference. A runaway slave is trying to get away from something, but a liberator is trying to get to something. And that's the big difference. That's a big, big difference. So a lot of us got to take the next stage of the next level of that evolution and start figuring out where it is we're trying to go, where it is we're trying to lead the people to. That's extremely important. Next, you need to study a grammar book, because you need to know how to write the language that you're supposed to speak. And it's probably difficult for people in different parts of the country, being that I'm from Texas and spent the majority of my life in Dallas or Fort Worth. You probably hear these words coming out of my mouth sounding completely awkward because I have that Southern twang in the way that I talk, and it's something that I've been working on. But we have to learn how to utilize these words correctly in the written way and in the verbal way. So it's good to study a good grammar book. I went hard on the grammar book for a minute because I wrote 4 books while I was down there. And I can write better than I can speak. Anyway, the fifth one is, and E does this all the time, I know, because I get the text of them. And that is, you need to stay up to current events. You need to find you a good news source that can give you news information to let you know what's going on in the world, because you got to understand that what's going on in the world, even I learned this in macroeconomics when I took macroeconomics. Stuff that's going on way over there will end up affecting you. And a macroeconomist knows how to look at those things and predict it. That's why people that play the stocks are always watching current events. That's why they do that, because they learn how to spot patterns and trends and predict what's going to happen next, and they're basically betting on it. That's what the stock game is. They're basically betting on their predictions being right, and when they're wrong, they lose money. When they're right, they get rich. So you have to know what's going on in the world around you so that you don't get caught off guard. The 6 is to own a good set of encyclopedias. This is one of those things that I said would be something that's outdated now, because Google is your set of encyclopedias. But down there, it was very important to own a set of encyclopedias or be able to get access to a set of encyclopedias, because encyclopedias is like a dictionary on steroids. If a dictionary can open up the meaning of a word, an encyclopedia can open up the history, the culture, the place for you. They'll give you all those things. And y'all got, what's that name of that thing that everybody go to as well? They look up Wikipedia. That's what it's called, that everybody go to. 7, and I'm pretty sure all of us got this point, but it's to own a computer and make sure that you're computer literate. Make sure that you know how to use this technology, because without a computer, me, E, and Ward wouldn't even be able to have this conversation right now and build and make this YouTube, and your phone is a mini computer. I know a lot of y'all think your phone is a social media device for watching what's going on with the Diddy situation and things like that, but that's not actually what your phone is. Your phone is a mini computer, and it's one of the best research tools that you could possibly have if you research the right thing. And like I say, I didn't know about these smartphones when I wrote this, so I only talked about the computer. 8, and again, this is another one of those things that's outdated, is to own an atlas. This is for me, for somebody like me, is very important, especially when you're studying history. I like to open up the atlas and look at the places that I'm looking at while I'm reading about these places, to get a better understanding of where they at, what part of the world they're in, things of that nature. I think those things are very important. E, you raise your hand up. What you had to say on that?
Yeah, I don't know how many more you have that are antiquated, or that you think are outdated, but I would say, and it's probably, if it's one more, 2 more, whatever, that it applies to them as well. But I would say that getting an encyclopedia, and especially an atlas, are not outdated to me, simply because, and again, I'm in the homesteader prepper mindset. In my head, at some point, your access to Google may not be there. So having some information, even though it may be 20 years, out or whatever, at least gives you something, some type of reference. On top of that, Google Maps is garbage. Let's face it, it's garbage. I remember a time when you had to open up an atlas, or what we call them, a Mapsco. Especially something like a Mapsco or atlas, because you get into map reading, learning how to see the grid the way they see the grid, and how that gives you just being able to do that, and to think about you driving down a street, and imagine looking at a map and seeing how that street actually moves and winds and curves, where it actually goes and meets up with other streets, as opposed to somebody saying turn left in 300 feet and that type of shit. Just the act of having to sit up and plot out your course on a map is an exercise for thinking and critical analysis and all of those things. And when my children were coming up, that was one of the things that we did, because of course back then there wasn't Google Maps and all of that, but we had the maps, and we would look at the map, and we would think, and we would talk about which direction we should go. This is faster, but this is nicer. All of those types of things, and maybe it's construction here or whatever is going on. But being able to read a map is a fundamental skill to me. whether you're reading, whether it's a typographical, is that the right one? Right? Name war typographical. I can't believe
That
I'm asking you for words.
the Floridian word, I'm good with it.
Oh shit. Anyway, topography.
Yeah.
You know, you were in the military. The map that shows you the hills and the valleys and the lakes and all of that shit. Or it's a street map or whatever type of map it is. Being able to understand your surroundings and to identify and relate yourself spatially. You know, what is your relationship to the next store down the street or the next river that you're coming to? That's a skill set. And that's something that we did, that we pioneered, that we founded, that we created, was, creating maps of our placement on the planet. That's a good damn thing to be able to, to identify. Because it's a damn shame how many people can't identify, where's Israel on a map? Where's Palestine where's Ukraine on a map? Where's the Congo? Where's Kenya? Where are these places on a map? And we can't identify it, which tells us right there that we not only don't know what time it is, we don't know where in the hell it is. We don't know where we are on the planet. As far as we're concerned, the Earth, and I'm not saying I believe it, but the Earth could very well be flat. We have no argument as a people. We have nothing to refute that with. We have nothing to come back with to even begin to argue that no, it's round. Because we don't even know where we sit in this world spatially, just our environment. So being able to read a map, oh hell yeah, I keep maps. I got several maps that I have for reference, and just because I have an old set of encyclopedias, because again, it's information to fall back on when your precious little internet is no longer accessible. So I don't think they're antiquated at all. I think they're very good, and everybody should have those as well.
You might be right. So I'm gonna change my view on that. I really didn't think about that, but yeah, they definitely. But I mean, it makes sense because I still, even though you can Google every word, I still own dictionaries. I still purchase dictionaries. When I see a dictionary for a nice cheap price, big enough, got the information I want, I have to have it. I still get it. I got so many dictionaries, it's ridiculous. But anyway, number 9, the last one on this developing your mind, the basic tools that you should have as a builder is and Confucius teaches that a man should study and revere the classics. When he was talking, he was just talking about China's classics. But in here, I'm talking about the world classics. And we know what the world classics are. And I'm not getting religious on y'all right now, but these are some things that you should at least read once, because they may come up in conversations. And there's one thing that Elijah Muhammad did say for the guys that didn't think we brought up Elijah. He said somebody asked him once why he always built from the Bible instead of the Quran. And he said that the Bible is the graveyard of his people. So you have to go there to dig his people up. So the Bible, without a doubt, is one of those classics. The Quran is one of those classics. The Confucian Analects is a classic. The Art of War by Sun Tzu is one of those world classics. And I would even say Machiavelli's The Prince is one of those world classics. If you've read these books, 9 times out of 10, most people in any kind of powerful situation have read these books. And I'm talking about powerful situation. I ain't talking about your supervisor at your job. I'm talking about somebody in powerful situations. Now, the black classics, or what I would call the black classics, is the autobiography of Malcolm X, Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, Message to the People by Marcus Garvey. Here we go, Message to the Black Man by Elijah Muhammad, and The Bridal Fire by Tony Browder, and Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, just to name a few. Black classics. If I meet a dude to tell me I'm pro-black, I'm black conscious, I'm militant. I met a person told me one time, and these new words I should have known then because of the word they used, that they was woke and they was conscious and aware and all this, and they had never read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I don't believe you. I just simply don't believe you. You tell me you conscious and you haven't read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I don't believe you. You can't be conscious. I don't know who you've been reading, because that would be one of the first steps that you would take in your very beginning. The average person, when they become quote unquote pro-black, black conscious, they usually read the autobiography of Malcolm X and they stop eating pork, regardless if they're Muslim or not. That's just one of the first steps. That's what they go through. You know what I'm saying? That's almost initiation phase. Anyway, and so I said those are the black classes. And remember that building is impossible without study. You have to study to show yourself approved. Rakim said, I work like a slave to be a master. You have to work like a slave to be a master. You have to study every single day without fail. It got to be like a training workout regimen. For any serious person, whether you're a Panther, revolutionary community activist, if you're trying to teach, build, heal, uplift, and evolve the people in any kind of way, you need to be studying every single day. And I'm not going to go into the long detail, but War took it and he reimagined it and reiterated it, and I know he passed it out a copy to every member of his chapter. A revolutionary is, and to be all the things that a revolutionary should be, you have to be studying consistently. You have to be a Renaissance person. You have to be a resourceful type of individual, because people are going to come to you with solutions. And you need to be able to come with an answer. You need to be able to come with a conclusion. You need to be able to have the ability to think mathematically. And that's what your studying, your consistent studying will give you. And I humbly believe that if you follow that process, if you study in that way, look up words that you don't know, take notes, make you stacks and stacks of composition tablets where you constantly took notes and build and got different levels of information out of. As he said, it's not antiquated. Get you a set of encyclopedias, get you an atlas, know how to do those studies. When you study that history, I promise you, and that goes back into that using that imagination. When you're studying history and reading about lands, and I ain't just talking about our history. When I was reading about Genghis Khan, I had the atlas open, and I'm all in the lands and in the territory that they in, because it brings it to life. It actually brings that thing alive in your mind, and the more you're able to turn that thing around in here, the greater that information is going to be. Anyway, that's all I had to say on that, brothers, because we're at that closing point. If any one of you got anything to say to bring us to a close.
I'm just gonna make this one quote. Now I let people dig it up and figure out where it came from. I understand that at any time I have the freedom to act as if I have successfully overcome a given emotion. My freedom to choose is the essence of my divinity. I will, therefore I am free.
Shakespeare, huh?
We let our listening audience figure that out. Let somebody respond in the comments where that quote came from.
And if you guess it right, you get a free book list.
And with that, this was your Panther 48. Peace and power.
Ta-ta.